Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have Bokai Zhu. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at Pitt, P-I-T-T, and we're going to talk about circadian rhythms and circadian clocks. So, Bokai, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
We're doing good. I mean, under the circumstances, we still work at home and share research is, I like to share research with everyone.
Okay. Well, very good. Tell me about your research. What are you working on?
So, broadly speaking, I'm working on biological rhythms or oscillations. So, I think everyone is familiar with, rhythms. We sleep. We have this 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. We have feeding, fasting cycles, and pretty much like all the life on Earth, they have certain rhythms. And when people talk about oscillations, there are three major parameters. That is the period, phase, and amplitude. So in terms of period, that basically means how often every cycle repeats itself. So the most common oscillation that exists in life forms on Earth is 24-hour circadian rhythm. So circadian actually means circadian, that means actually around the day. So circadian rhythms actually means they are the rhythms, the cycle with a period of close to 24 hours. And so when I started out my research in postdoc trainings, actually I began to study circadian. And then I studied this 24-hour oscillation for like 3-4 years. That's up to, I think, around 2017. So I don't know, someone may know that actually 3 years ago, the Nobel Prize in Physiology medicine was awarded to three scientists who discovered the circadian rhythm, circadian clock in flies. So the whole field the whole field actually of the circadian field was well recognized, and people have been really taking these rhythms very seriously. But
so are you studying it in people, or what are you studying about it?
So for me, is I use a mouse as a model to study these rhythms, and so. The thing is, when the whole field was recognized and Nobel Prize was given, that one thing, there's a positive aspect, which means, people appreciate that. But there's also, I think the downside is, that means when the Nobel Prize was given, that means, everyone think the whole field was saturated, like everything was pretty much known. So there's really nothing new, really fundamentally new or groundbreaking to uncover. So, for me, is I want to start my career. I want to do something that's, more creative, more innovative. It's not something that's been well studied. So actually, I started to shift my focus from this 24-hour rhythm to so these are also oscillations, but they're called Ultradian oscillations. So Ultradian means rhythm that cycle with a period smaller than a day. So these oscillations are much less known. That exist in different species from lower animal up to human, but really no one really know what they are, how they what they do, and how they regulate it. So this, I think, I see opportunity for myself, my own career, because I found a new novel niche where I think I can really make some potentially groundbreaking discoveries on this new.
Well, what questions do you want to answer about it?
So the question is like everything. Because that's the best thing about doing something that no one knows is that everything about this circadian clock was unknown. So the question would be how are they regulated? What are functions of these 12-hour oscillations? How evolutionarily conserved are they? Can we really manipulate these 12-hour oscillations to impact human health, impact diseases? There's like so many questions we can ask, we can tackle. And that makes me very, very excited to pursue this new rhythm and discovers something like fundamentally or groundbreaking. So that's kind of like my research is focused on since 2017. So for the past 3 years, my focus actually shifted to ultradian rhythms. So that's where I'm at now.
So what happens during the cycle in mice?
So that's
do we even know all the things that change and how this?
So that's very interesting. When I started to looking at these new rhythms, I began to appreciate how different these 12-hour rhythms are compared to the 24 hours. So even though they're all rhythms, but they're really fundamentally different. They're controlled by completely different molecular pathways. They're functionally also very different, and their evolution origin are also distinct. So I think I want to start with evolution origin. That's very interesting. So the reason why the circadian rhythm, the 24-hour rhythm exists on Earth is because of the 24-hour light-dark cycle. Because that's the way like the whole universe was designed. The rotation of the Earth is 24 hours. So the animals that live on Earth need to adapt to this 24-hour light-dark cycle. So they develop through evolution. They develop the 24-hour rhythm. For this 12-hour rhythm, it turned out actually the 12-hour rhythms was designed to adapt to the 12-hour tidal rhythms. So if you live close to the ocean, if you like to surf, you know that during a day we experience too high tide and too low tide at the interval of 12 hours. So there's certain marine animals, crustaceans, fish, crabs. These marine animals, their dominant rhythm are 12 hours. So normally they came out of the ocean or when the tide is recede, or vice versa. So these rhythms are actually trained or adapted as tidal rhythms. And it turned out actually the 12 rhythms that exist in higher animals, including mouse and even humans, they are actually evolutionarily conserved. They are evolved from the ancient, I call it circadian clock, from the marine animals. Even though we don't live in the ocean, we don't sense these tidal cues anymore, but somehow, these rhythms is still there, it's preserved. That definitely means that there have got to be very important physiological functions, right? Otherwise, evolution will now select for it. So that, I think, is one very interesting aspect of 12 rhythms. And it has also have a origin that's connected to this moon entrained tidal cue. That's one of the fascinating aspects of these new rhythms.
Wait, so because the mice have a 12-hour rhythm which relates to the tides, it also relates to the moon?
Yes, that's what we're thinking. Yes, that's the current thinking of this 12-hour rhythm.
So, what do you see then when the moon is waxing and waning, and
So
how do you overlay these cycles, and then what do you see?
So the thing is, so that's something that I need to be, more very careful about making a direct. I have to be very careful of making a direct connection between the moon and the rhythms in higher animals like us, because we don't think really like if our own rhythms really bounding directly to the moonlight. I don't think that's the reason for these rhythms in mammals. So the scientific words I prefer to use is called co-opt, C-O-O-P-T. So the co-opt means, so we use these 12-hour rhythms which are designed for something else in lower animals, but it's redesigned for something else. So that's called co-option. So we think is that in marine animals, definitely these rhythms was really sensing the tidal cue correctly. But somehow when the animals during evolution transition from the ocean to inland, these rhythms actually is not really sensing to, let's say, the moonlight or the tidal cues, but it's sensing something else, which in my mind actually is sensing the stress. I think it's sensing the stress that's accumulate during the transitional period in the morning and in the early evening. So
why not, if you do think that the moon may have a role, why not look at the 12-hour clock in a given mouse and then see if it correlates with the phases of the moon for some reason?
Yeah, so
if it doesn't, then you can throw that out. If it does,
never did the experiment because moon mice the active. So the way we do experiment is always in the lab, and then we always maintain the mouse in the environment, which is 12-hour light and 12-hour dark. So basically, the light is on for 12 hours and shut off another 12 hours. So there's really no changing in the tone of the light. It's on or off. It's black and white. There's no grading. There's no gradient. It would be cool to study whether the dim light or the bright light can influence these rhythms. That's definitely a possibility, but we haven't really studied that. And another interesting aspect of this rhythm is that it's even though it's responding or can be entrained by these environmental cues, such as light, food, temperature, but they can also oscillate in the absence of these cues. So that's the most interesting aspect of rhythm, because that means that there's an internal clockwork, or there's an internal pacemaker that is responsible for establishing and maintaining the rhythm that's independent of external cues. So that's true also for the circadian and the 12 rhythms. So these rhythms can be observed even in a cell in a petri dish. So you don't really need a tide or moonlight to establish the rhythm. They are there by itself. There's a molecular machine.
But right. If they're there already, then why not just overlay the cycles of the moon and see? Right now there's a time of the new moon. Weird. We're noticing these hormones are particularly troughing, but right now it's a full moon. That's correlating somehow. It's weird.
So when you talk about that is called circulunar rhythm. It's not tidal. So moon can actually enjoy two different rhythms. So what you mentioned actually is the rhythm, the cycle, that's a monthly cycle rhythms, like full moon, crescent moon, right? This is a longer rhythm which cycles every month, 28 days. But what I'm working on actually is it's called circadian rhythm, which cycle every 12-hour rhythm. So it doesn't really responding to, let's say, a full moon or crescent moon, but rather responding to the tidal, which happen every single day. Actually, I happen every 12 hours. So it's another aspect of the moon, which I think is independent of the light, at least independent from the luminosity of the light. It's really more dependent on the tidal rhythms, which are indirectly caused by the gravity pull of the moon, rather than by the light emitted by the moon.
So in the lab, are you just turning on and off the lights at the appropriate times to see the cycling or the absence of cycling, or what are you doing?
So like I said, you don't need light. So the real experiment actually is mice are under constant darkness. So the light is completely off. So we try to avoid external cues. We try to avoid external or environmental influence on the rhythms, because we want to make sure that these rhythms, they are self-autonomous and they're not disturbed by potential environment. But once you really if you disrupt the life cycle, you will disrupt the rhythm. If you disrupt a normal behavior of the mice, for example, by feeding the mice at different time of the day, or feeding the mice with different food, unhealthy food, like high-fat, like food with rich in fat, you will disrupt the rhythm. When we see that anything that disrupts a normal rhythm of the mice will have deleterious effect on the clock, and also will have negative impact on the health of the mice. So it appears that maintaining a normal cycle of both circadian and 12 rhythms are essential for maintaining normal homeostasis of the mice. And very importantly, that this rhythm definitely play a very important role in regulating diseases. So that's kind of like one of the area of my research in the lab is to figure out how this rhythms really tie into diseases, not just in mice, but also potentially in human. So that's so
they're in darkness all the time. And what's happening during the 12-hour period? What do you observe?
So what we see is actually these rhythms. So the rhythm goes up and down, right? So most of the rhythms or those gene expression or activity of metabolism, so they actually very interesting. They peak during dawn and dusk. So the 12-hour clock, actually their activity during the two additional periods in the morning and in the dusk. That's very different from the 24 rhythms. So what we're thinking is that during this, so the analogy of the 12 rhythms is the traffic on the highway. It's the rush hour on the highway. So during the two rush hours, we have heavy traffic, right? Like more people go to work. So there's a traffic. And so what I'm thinking is actually there's also traffic in the cell during the same period, for two rush hours. So that traffic was not caused by car, but rather caused by gene expression, protein expression, like molecular events during these two rush hours. And what this 12 o'clock does is like what this HOV lane does to a highway. We try to accommodate or alleviate the heavy traffic. So that's two rush hours, lot of proteins, a lot of genes are expressed trying to accommodate this heavy traffic. So if we lose the clock, that there will be a traffic jam, okay, in the cell, and a lot of proteins will be unable to be correctly processed for secretion. There will be a lot of proteins misfolded and accumulated in the cell because the HOV lane was shut down. Everyday metaphor. And then
how do you know? Are you looking at the transcriptomics of mice at certain points in the cycle?
Exactly.
Is that what you're doing?
Yes, we look like transcriptome, proteomic, metabolome, like every aspect of the omics, and we see these interesting oscillations that most of the oscillation again peak at these two rush hours, and we see the genes, the transcriptome, the genes that do show this sort of behavior. They are really enriched in biological pathways that process either mRNA or protein. So they act as a vehicle to basically regulate the capacity of genetic information flow from the nucleus to and then to cytosol and even out of the cell. So when you make hormones, you need to secrete the hormones. So the whole 12 o'clock does is kind of like act as a vehicle that controls the whole capacity of this genetic information flow. So that's and also the whole thing that what we found in mouse or in human, like transcriptome, proteomic, and metabolome, these changes are also happening in these marine animals. Same genes, same proteins, the same metabolites. They also show the same 12 rhythms in marine animals, which again support this hypothesis, evolution hypothesis. The male 12 rhythms actually evolved from the circadian clock from marine animals. The whole thing is really conserved, evolution conserved, regardless of whether we live in the ocean or not.
Okay, so you're identifying that every 12 hours is a flurry of activity of transcripted elements, things going on in these cells, and then it's is it quiet within the 12 hours, or are there certain subtimes that are peaking?
So for the 12 rhythms, they are, they're really more uniform. The genes that do behave in the 12 rhythms way, they are more, their phases are highly restricted to these two time points. So I think and also they're much more evolutionarily conserved compared to the 24-hour circadian rhythms. So actually we think the 12-hour clock or the circadian clock actually evolved earlier than the 24-hour circadian. I think they come up first because during evolution, I think you sense the tidal cues first, then you begin to sense, when you live in the ocean, you really don't really sense too much of a light changes, but rather this tidal changes. And these rhythms behave very similarly, and they're controlled by proteins, transcription factors in a very coherent fashion. So that they're and so we think that it's more conserved and more tightly regulated compared to the circadian clock.
Okay, so I know you have a lot to work on. What do you think is going to be some insights that you're going to be getting in the next year or two? What's coming close?
So we try, one of the direction is aging. So we want to study how these 12 rhythms really, how they tied into aging. And there's some preliminary data which shows some very interesting aspects. So what we see in mouse is that once the mice gets older, these 12-hour rhythms became 24-hour rhythms. So there's a period conversion. There's a change in the same gene. Originally, young mice cycle with a normal 12 rhythm, but once the mice get older, this 12 rhythms become 24. So this clearly is a very prevalent reprogramming going on. So it appears that it's flexible. The rhythms are not fixed. There are certain things that can affect the periodicity, the amplitude, or even the phase of the rhythms. And so we're trying to figure out how these two rhythms, how they convert, whether this conversion or reprogramming is driving the aging process. And if so, can we find new or innovative ways to prevent this reprogramming? So if we can stop the 12-hour rhythm to become, from becoming this 24-hour rhythm, maybe we can slow down aging. So that's just some like translational aspects in my lab. And some other area is, can we really, how can we explore these rhythms to other diseases, to other tissues, to other organs? For example, we have some preliminary data suggesting these 12 rhythms, they actually exist in the hippocampus of the brain, which is very important for memory formation, memory consolidation. And a lot of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, they hit hippocampus. And it turned out in the 12 rhythms in the controls protein homeostasis. So another, very preliminary or like hypothesis is that maybe in humans with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, they have a disrupted 12-hour clock in the brain. And that may be one of the underlying contributor to this diseases. So there's a lot of things that can be done on these rhythms and study how this disruption, this 12-hour oscillation, may drive a variety of different diseases. So we think maybe the disruption of the 12-hour clock is a hallmark of aging. It's a hallmark of morbidity of diseases, like that people ignore or missed in the past. But it appears that potentially is the case.
Yeah, I guess that you could time your eating, time your taking of drugs, time a lot of things according to your particular clocks and subclocks.
Yes,
that may impact your health a lot.
Exactly. So there's a concept called chronotherapy. That's first proposed by the circadian biologists. People basically means you need to treat people at specific time of day. You need to take drugs or a specific time of day. If you give a drug at wrong time of day, will not be effective. And there are some examples where that's true. If you administer a drug at wrong time, it could be toxic instead of effective. And that is based on the circadian clock. But I think the same concept can also apply to 12 rhythms. If that's the case, it maybe means you need to take drugs twice a day. Maybe you need to take certain drugs only in the morning after you wake up and in the 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. before sleep. So maybe you need to, the interval of taking drugs potentially also matters. Instead of taking once every day, probably means you need to take some drugs twice every day at specific times. So there's a lot of potential applications of like specific research into even clinical practice. So that's another aspect of my research, translational aspect of my research.
Well, Bokai, it's very interesting. We're out of time. Our clock has run out. What's the best way for people to keep pace with you and see what you're researching and learn about it?
So come to a website, and there's some news coverage on my research. Whenever I publish a paper, I really want to reach out to news agencies and try to get the lay public know about research. Actually, for the original Discover 12 o'clock, quite a number of news coverage is there's a Science Daily, some other journals, popular science journals. They cover my story, and so I think that's a really good way. You need to let the public to know about your research. So I will try my best, to do more podcasts or do more interviews, so that people will know about my research and appreciate the importance and how we can really change our behavior, to make sure that our behaviors are adapted to this normal cycle. Because we know that if you have a disrupted circadian clock, you are really more likely to develop a lot of diseases. So I think the whole rhythms, the field of rhythms is very important, for everyone's health. So we need to listen to, what scientists say.
Well, very good. Well, Bokai, thanks for coming on the call, and keep researching. This stuff's really important, and I'm glad you're looking at it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.